Welcome to another episode of Miller Mindset, brought to you by BitLyft. This is where we discuss all things cybersecurity by cutting through the noise and sharing brutal truths, as I like to do, and leaving you with the strategies that keep what you've built safe and strong. In this episode, we're going to be tackling the unique cybersecurity challenges in the mid-market software SaaS space, understanding what companies face. These organizations are about 400 to 700 employees in size, big enough to have an enterprise level risk, but often without the enterprise level resources. With heavy reliance on APIs and integrations, each partner connection creates a new risk and new conversations. With me today is a special person that I have gotten to know over the last several years. And I want to introduce Scott to you guys. Scott joins us from the North Carolina region of the United States. And so welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Jason. It's good to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, I met Scott in Michigan. At one point in his life and career, he was near me in Michigan, but he had the opportunity, which I am slightly jealous because I love North Carolina myself. He got the opportunity to relocate back to the beautiful state of North Carolina.
Yeah, I was happy to leave my snow shovel and snowblower behind, I must say.
Yes. You guys get the cold weather, but no snow, right?
Yep.
Well, I've asked you to join today's Miller Mindset because you've got the awesome opportunity to be in the mid-market space. You work at and have built, have had the opportunity to build a company into that mid-market space. If I remember correctly, you were like employee number 30 or something at the company?
Yeah. So I started in 2010, which is quite a long time ago, as it turns out. And our arm of the company had about 40 people at the time, and now we've grown to north of 400. So it's been quite a journey.
So one of the things that I wanted to highlight in our conversation today is why the mid-market is so critical, as a critical segment in the cybersecurity. I'm sure your organization, you guys have lots of conversations around, how APIs are integrating into your software, the usage of APIs, maybe the SaaS sprawl, that has happened in your organization. Seems like everything today is SaaS or, it's not necessarily servers and dedicated infrastructure. It's a lot of connect to this for a few seconds or a few moments, do some sort of job and come back. And those partner integrations are a unique challenge, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the sheer breadth of all of the tools that we use just to run our internal business, to say nothing of all of the partner connections that we have in our application and all of our customer connections, means there's a tremendous amount of back and forth and interplay. The days where you could sort of white label the connections that were authorized going in and out of your servers is gone, because everybody is using a new tool. They've partnered with a new company. And so, doing things the old fashioned way of saying, here's a checkbox, here's network rules that are allow and deny. Just that those days are gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. We ask companies all the time, what IP addresses are you coming from? And what are you going to, what ports are you guys using? And it's like people look at you kind of funny because they're like, well, we're coming from AWS, or we're coming from, Microsoft Azure, or we're coming from some other cloud, and they're unwilling or they are unable to give you IP addresses and ports. Yes. But again, if you don't know the IP that you're coming from and to, then it's the port's sort of irrelevant, right?
Yeah. It's definitely a dynamic landscape now compared to 10 or 12 years ago.
And so one of the other major points that I want to kind of expand on today that I think that we will get to is the reality of the boardroom and the executive conversations, budget versus risk versus efficiency versus security. And you probably have those conversations. I believe you probably go in front of the board or communicate, to the executive team, a lot of those things, correct?
That's correct. I'm thick in the middle. I may or may not have 7 budget spreadsheets open on my computer as we speak, because
Oh my gosh.
it's about that time of year. And so yeah, it's really, everybody is out for their slice of the pie. Everybody wants their share of technology money to go and do their initiative and go and do their need for whatever growth opportunity they want. And I think one of the challenges that we face for cybersecurity, especially if you have a good cybersecurity team, which I think we do at Modus, it's almost invisible. And so people are like, well, we don't have any incidents, so why do we need all this money for security? And the answer really is, well, we need this money so that we don't have any incidents. But it's hard to really sort of quantify and demonstrate risk in sort of a abstract fashion compared to the theoretically more concrete, like I can go sell this product for X number of millions of dollars. It's hard to quantify what's the risk if somebody comes in and grabs all of our user database. We know it would be a problem, but it's a lot more amorphous.
I love that you bring that topic up, and that's a real conversation that you guys have. Is because cybersecurity really is sort of hidden until it is a problem, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head. You won't know it's a problem until you stop spending the money in that area, or you no longer buy this tool or these tools to help protect the organization, and then it's like, okay, well, crap. We quit spending or buying that tool, and then it's a lag effect, right? It probably won't be seen or experienced until sometime down the road.
Absolutely.
Days, weeks, or months. And then when you do have the problem, it's like, well, we stopped doing something, in the previous time, and we shouldn't have done that, all in the name of saving some money. Right.
Yeah, you have to have an organization and leadership team that really can appreciate and understand the value of preventative and measures. We thankfully do have a leadership team that I think is bought into the notion of things like SOC 2 certification and things like cybersecurity and all of the tools and infrastructure. They understand. They've all been in the business before, and if you've ever been at a company that's had a cybersecurity issue, and almost all of them have at some point or another. You do understand that, but it's not one of those things that you can sort of leave in the budget and just hope that it happens. You sort of have to relitigate it on an ongoing basis. But thankfully, there's enough horror stories out there, to help keep it top of mind for a lot of people.
Nobody wants your organization to be that, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Well, let's get into sort of a couple of questions, topics that I had sort of prepared and wanted to talk with you today about, which is, you are a mid-market company, and you have quite a lot of integrations. My opinion, yours could be different, but you have the opportunity of integrating with lots of different companies. You have dependencies. You've been in the trenches of coding. Now I think you sort of help manage and coach the teams, but at least like, hey, we connect and integrate with a lot of other partners and technology. Why does that mid-market company like yours and others face the enterprise level threats? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's easier and easier for malicious actors out there to go after just about anybody. The tools that they're using, the AI enablement of malicious code and threats, the bot farms out there, they don't discriminate. I mean, we might be a somewhat smaller target because maybe we don't have as many dedicated API or dedicated IP addresses at Amazon as a enterprise company would be, but that doesn't matter if they're scanning millions of IP addresses automatically. And so the threats that are coming out are largely sort of not targeted at us particularly, but they're casting a wide net, and whoever's vulnerable is vulnerable. And so it doesn't matter that we're 1/100th the size of a Google or, or more than 100 or less than 100th of the size of Google. But
Right.
it doesn't really matter. They just know that if they find a vulnerability at us, they're going to go exploit that just like they would at an enterprise company. And so the real challenge is we've got to make sure that we're putting that same level of diligence. And the consequences for us are even larger. Being a mid-market company, a severe incident like that could be business threatening. It even increases the threat, based on the percentage of likelihood that it's out there.
Yeah, I think about like things that even have emerged in the last couple of weeks, right? The security vulnerabilities in GitHub, the whole NPM packages risk. I mean, what are your thoughts there with software dependencies and the scale of that?
I think I was following along with the whole Ruby Gems maintainer drama that's going on right now with people them removing access from Ruby Gems. I think more and more open source is going to be a real challenge for larger companies to adopt because of the risks. I know that Google had an initiative a few years ago to provide, I think, what they called trusted software packages, which were basically repackaging of open source packages that they themselves had vetted and reviewed incoming changes. Before I worked at Modus, I worked at Fidelity Investments, so very large, financial institution, cared very much about this. They did the same thing. They had approved version of open source software, and they did not let any changes come in from those until they were vetted by the internal security team. And so I think that for companies that are really concerned about security risk and have the ability to do that at that scale, I think we're going to see less and less sort of, git pull, just grab open source software willy-nilly. I think that is going to become a larger and larger risk point. I think the challenge is going to be in our organization. We don't have time to go rewrite Spring Framework from scratch or vet every, delta coming in. And so I'm hopeful that there's an opportunity there for someone in the industry to say, like, we're providing vetted versions of open source software. That's, I think, is going to be the only way that we're going to be able to scale. Is like open source, you may still be able to contribute to that, but there's going to have to be a filter somewhere where some organization that you probably are going to have to pay decent amounts of money to is going to have to sign off and say, like, we're comfortable that, we're scanning these for backdoor access and making sure that it's filtered out. But the ease with which someone can go in and start to ingest, put malicious code in there, it's just getting easier and easier and easier with LLMs and that. Not just the coding aspect of it, but the social aspect. There was a Unix package a year or two ago that someone had played, like it was a 2-year game of becoming a trusted maintainer and getting the trust and becoming a contributor to the package, and then snuck some backdoor code in it. And it was on pretty much every Unix system out there. That's going to get the cycle time of that is going to get faster and faster.
Yeah. And that just amplifies or highlights that, criminal activity is patience, right? Because one day in the future, this will have a magnitude of payout, and I think that's, not a lot of people pay attention to that, but that's reality.
Yeah. And organizations are going to have to, I think, do a better job of risk management. Certain pieces of data that organizations hold are more valuable or more risky than others. And so you may not be in a place to protect every single piece of data that you hold equally. And so I think companies, have said, we're going to prevent any kind of data breach. And companies may have to, in the next, few years, say, you know what, we don't want a data breach, but if we had to be breached, it's okay if this kind of data got out because it wouldn't be business threatening. But if we lost everybody's social security number, for example, then, that would be a really big deal. So I think that kind of segmentation of security and risk assessment, and putting your resources where the risk is highest is also going to be really important.
Yeah, I concur with you. I mean, I believe that we should be, as organizations, being prepared to be breached and having those conversations around we're okay with certain sections of our environment getting breached, because you cannot apply a one size fits all to the entire organization as far as cybersecurity risk goes. It's impossible. I think it would be not financially feasible to apply that to every aspect of the business. I mean,
Yeah.
You just talk about vetting packages, vetting the open source packages that companies use. Just think about if you had to assign resources to vetting the packages before you use them. How many more new people would you be asking for on your team to do that?
Yeah.
Or to potentially write the code from scratch, right? And build your own. That there's a cost associated to each aspect of that.
Huge. And so I think it's seductive for companies to think, we can kind of prevent that on the way in, and just, we're going to get this service and this, turn on our firewalls and then we're good to go. But I think having a layered strategy, it's like software architecture. When we started building cloud native applications, you went from how do we make sure our server has 99.9999% uptime to, well, this server is going to crash at some point.
Right.
We just have to make sure that when it crashes, we can recover and be resilient and that sort of thing. And I think security is heading in that direction of you have to expect that something's going to go wrong. And so how can you mitigate the impact as much as possible?
I love that analogy. I may use that, again in the future.
Okay, cool. You can send my royalty check over.
I will make sure to do that.
Perfect.
So let's get into it a little bit deeper. I love that you went into that area, but if you think about, your APIs, SaaS sprawl, partner integrations, what are the conversations that you guys have around some of that, and how do you mitigate the risks?
I mean, the first step really is cataloging. We've really tried to focus and centralize our management just of understanding what vendors are out there. And, for those of you who've worked with, non-technical teams or technical teams, they go out there like, oh yeah, I bought this service. It was cool. It looked fun. And now I'm using it every day. And your IT team may have no clue that it's out there. And so starting to understand the catalog is important. Starting to understand, your partner connections, just having documentation around all of this. It's not fun and it's sort of annoying, and you have to go through a process and all of that. But that's really the first step. We spent a lot of time a couple of years ago doing a, crown jewels data analysis of understanding, what data do we have? Where does that data go? Understanding that. And then you can start to assess the risk and say like, okay, well, we have this vendor, but all they get are people's names. And so that's not a terrible, risk. And then we have this other vendor, and they may get some more personal information that's, higher, or this group might get, something really critical. So, trying to make sure that we triage and understand where the data is that we have and where it flows. We do have some road bumps or speed bumps that we put in place on purpose to make it a little bit more challenging to get things set up. We funnel a lot of our connections and infrastructure through an infrastructure team. And we've told them in no uncertain terms, like, your job is to make sure that when somebody needs a connection to something, they do it the right way, and that we've thought through this and that they've checked with legal and IT and security. And that's caused some friction, but it has also prevented, I think, us putting in place some systems and some connections that hadn't been vetted. It's the, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so making sure that you go through the process while it seems annoying,
right,
has been really critical. Then it's also just kind of vigilance, making sure you've got the right sensors turned on, the right feedback, the right information that's coming in. And if you see something weird, raising your hand, and then you have to go on a little Indiana Jones mission to go figure out what it is and where it's coming from, and is this authorized? And that's how we find out sometimes about these other vendors. Not too often, but it's just sort of being constantly vigilant.
I think what you're describing is happening at almost every organization. It's not just your organization that this is happening to. I mean, we talk to our customers as well, and this happens. This is, I think, sort of human nature, that showcases itself, where you sort of forget about processes and standard operating procedures sometimes. And you talk about going Indiana Jones. I mean, you find out at the end of the tunnel that it really wasn't a delightful experience. It was like, hey, why did you skip the process and the procedure that we put into place here? And the treasure at the end was actually like, you had to like take some sort of recourse methodology that you didn't foresee, right?
Yeah. I mean, everybody has a good reason for it. They're like, oh, well, this is really important, and I was trying to get this, close this deal or do this thing. But it's not as much as you want everybody in your organization to care as much about security and compliance as, your CISO does. It's not going to happen. And so I think making sure that we put in place the right frameworks to sort of force everybody to pay attention to that. And we've been mostly successful. It's interesting to see sort of the rise of the vendor management industrial complex. We get more and more spreadsheets and things from our clients asking us all these questions about how we do all these things, which then in turns means we got to send more spreadsheets and questionnaires and things to our vendors. But you can see that it's just proliferating across the industry, that more and more every organization wants to make sure that their sub-processors are taking as good care of things as they think they are, which just sort of means everybody's paying more and more attention and spending more and more time on this, which isn't always a bad thing, but it makes there's some friction.
How does all of that sort of like make its way into executive conversations, when you're talking about budget and risk and APIs and partners? What are some of the executive conversations happening, with that type of information?
Our conversations are really, we know we have growth targets and we have profitability targets to achieve. And so our conversations are less about if, but more about how, and how do we do things in a responsible manner. So our executive team is not saying, no, you can't go partner with, we want to release this feature, but no, you can't go partner with this company because it seems weird or insecure, because we don't want to shortcut a growth opportunity. We're saying, how can we work with this vendor, work with this potential partner to make sure that we're properly securing the information and making it a secure, confident interactions. So those are more the kind of conversations that we're having from a budgeting standpoint. It's a fight, but our security and compliance teams have gotten pretty good about articulating what the value is of the things that they're doing. And, we've seen this. We've never had a data breach in our company's existence. So we have an industry-leading reputation of being extremely secure, extremely, well placed in terms of compliance and security. We hear that from our account teams, and so making sure that we get that feedback from them, because they're hearing it from our clients saying, you're way ahead of your competitors in the marketplace when it comes to the sophistication and maturity. That translates directly into our ability to add line items to the budget when it comes budgeting season, to say, hey, we need this to maintain our industry leading, security position. So whatever you can do to sort of say, like, we're not doing this security work just for the fun of it, right? We're doing it because ultimately it's a business accelerator. It's a business benefit to our clients. And so making sure you can tie that thread through has been really helpful in making sure that we get, not as much money as we like, because, we could always use more money, but enough money to maintain our position.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm assuming though that this sort of influence and these conversations go all the way to the board level, and
For sure.
even to the PE firm that has a position there. You're articulating all of these things to them as well, I'm sure, correct?
Yeah, we have a cybersecurity committee on our board that's includes members of our organization and members of the board. And because we are PE owned, they have cybersecurity experts who come in and do advisories. It was a little more intense early on, but I think once they got comfortable with our positioning, they've sort of let us continue to run. But yes, absolutely, the board is on top of what's going on in the market. They've got, things that they hear across their portfolio companies. So they're sending out messages saying, hey, we're seeing this threat across, this portion of our portfolio. So make sure that you're on top of things that are going on. I think, North Korean actors posing as software engineers was something that we got a threat notification about. Like, how do you know that person that you just hired, who's a remote employee, is who they say they are? So, we're sharing and gathering information across the portfolio there, which has been super helpful.
That's a real live threat, by the way. I mean, that's like not make believe. Like, we are actually seeing that as well. And people wonder, like, how is this even possible? How does this person actually really get hired in there? It's like, well, in a lot of ways, I wouldn't say people have maybe relaxed the way that they hire, but just that the hiring isn't like, this person isn't showing up, 40 hours a week to an office building anymore. And so we have to think differently about how we hire, how we vet, how we background check, how we do all of these things to make sure that, you don't hire a North Korean hacker, into your environment, and, they wait 2 years before they release some malicious piece of code in your environment, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's all kinds of, I think we have to be worried, like, are you actually hiring a human being? I just read an article this morning and it said, it was from a hiring manager who said they got on the phone and, all of a sudden realized that they weren't talking to a human being. They were talking to an AI agent. And so, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
The AI agent is going to get,
well, that too, but the threat model as well.
The threat model, yeah.
But there's a lot to keep track of, and I'm really grateful that we've got some dedicated security capacity in our organization. But that's a luxury that a lot of companies, sort of at our end of the market and below, just don't have. But it's increasingly becoming a critical part of doing business.
Maybe you can speak to a little bit like how identity sprawl, right, in the challenges of securing, access across, hundreds of employees, dozens of systems. What are some of the things that you guys have maybe done and you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, we've relied as much as we can on single sign-on and Microsoft, identity across all of our things. We're moving, we were a smaller company, and so BYOD policies were kind of relaxed. So we're tightening those up. Keep hearing about how this person can't get to, their production database from their phone anymore. I'm like, well, that's probably okay. We give you a laptop for a reason. Making sure that when we're partnering with vendors, sometimes or usually we'll spend the extra money to go get the SSO option to make sure that we're doing that to help with automated provisioning and deprovisioning, going from those things. We have a pretty robust checklist of systems, but every time we offboard or onboard somebody, we realize there's a new one that we need to go do. But our team is really good. We have a pretty solid enterprise IT team that goes and makes sure that they keep tabs on all of those systems and pieces. And so really trying to centralize around one piece of technology and making sure that if we're buying a piece of software, that vendor can integrate to our standards of identity management and security and onboarding and offboarding, has been more and more important. And we're seeing that more and more. But ultimately, it's also a balance. If your CRO says we need this tool, like to go close a bunch of deals, and it doesn't have an SSO option, that's where it gets added to the checklist. And so we're doing some things with manual checklists and tasks, and as much as we can with centralizing identity around Active Directory and Azure AD.
Has there been any sort of like near misses that you can talk about that would be like, this was a near miss, like, and this was the learning lessons that maybe came out of that?
This was about 10 years ago. So I think it's sufficiently old enough. We've passed the statute of limitations. But early on in our cloud architecture, we were running a precursor to Kubernetes called Mesos, which was a cloud, cluster management software. And we got an alert one day that like our staging environment was running out of CPU and was overloaded. And we went in there, and somebody was running Bitcoin miner software on our staging cluster. So we had inadvertently left one of the control plane ports open to the internet, and somebody discovered it again with a random scan, and was just like, "Oh, hey, this is a Apache Mesos, control plane." I just queried the API, and they were like, "Oh, let's go fire up some Bitcoin mining." So thankfully, didn't have any signs of them doing anything other than trying to find a couple Bitcoin. I hope it was worth it to them. Or we should have kept some of it if they'd found any. That would have been great. But that taught us pretty quickly, you got to be careful and sanitize your ports. But I mean, it also emphasized the fact that like, doesn't have to be targeted to us. It can just be a drive-by. So that made us, pretty careful then about doing auditing and our own penetration testing. And, we have red teams that come and routinely monitor our systems and make sure that they, if they can get in from the outside that they shouldn't be, that we're continuing to remediate that.
Yeah, I think that is still something that I try and drive home with people is that you don't necessarily have to be picked out by name, right? These criminal hackers, they didn't necessarily like wake up this morning and say, well, we're going to go after Scott Rankin today, and Modus. It's more or less, it really is, the luck of the draw, right? Their vulnerability scanner, their scanners, their tools, now using AI, now finding out and digging up information a lot faster with the usage of AI and automated tooling, that it's really, your number was pulled, right? Like today was your lucky number. And it was simply because, either a week or two or three or a month ago, some port or something was left open inadvertently, and, you didn't realize it, and that happens. And I think that we have seen that, it's not always intentional, right? You didn't intentionally leave the ports open. You didn't intentionally make this change, but it had inadvertent consequences that you didn't maybe foresee, and then it was used. And so,
And I think it's not a static problem either. I mean, you can't say, oh, well, I did an audit of all my internet ports and I closed them all, so we're fine. Like, you have to do that, don't just set it up once, set it up on a recurring basis. Don't just, because things change in your software all the time and in your stack. And so seeing that as sort of a permanent fixture of your repeating security, management, it's none of these things are set it and forget it.
I'm glad that you bring that up, because we oftentimes share with clients that, having a vulnerability scan even once a month or at once a quarter is not good enough anymore, right? Our mindset needs to change. Like, IT people and the organization shows up on a daily basis. And I argue that the IT environment, the operations of the organization are changing on a daily basis, right? And so I'm glad that you said that, because I don't believe anything is static anymore. I believe it truly is liquid. It is dynamic. It's changing all the time. And so we need a security approach that changes all the time, that changes with the organization on a daily basis.
For sure. I mean, you never know what your next engineer or, salesperson is going to go turn on or install in your environment, or when somebody's going to fat finger a security rule in your AWS environment. And so making sure that you've got that always on detection is really critical, and making sure that people are paying attention to the results and going out and actually remediating them, or, working with an organization like BitLyft where you can go and have some of that stuff taken care of automatically, because also time is of the essence. I think somebody does a study that says, the amount of time it takes for an unpatched Windows laptop connected to the internet to get, to have something, malware installed, is not long. And so, this is not like something you can do once a month or even, once a week. It's gotta be always going.
Always going. Yeah. And then if you even think about that in the cloud, Azure, AWS, whatever, if you're using Google Compute, it's sort of amazing to me that, people are quick to adopt these things, which is great. But at the same token, like the cybersecurity implementation plan approach around these pieces is often thought about like after the words. And what I've really been advocating, is a built-in approach. Like, hey, are you guys and your teams, talking about like, hey, we're going to go and thinking about consuming this new product or service, how do we make it operational, but how do we make it secure at the same time?
Yeah, we do. We make sure that is, built into our SDLC, is what's the data. We think about it from a privacy standpoint. We think about it from a security standpoint. So, making sure that we've got all of those bases covered in addition to the functionality, is non-negotiable at this point. So we really try to drive that home with our teams to make sure that they're thinking not just, what functionality is this thing delivering, but how are we going to make it so that it doesn't reduce our security posture?
Yeah. What are the outcomes and results that we're all hoping for through this? And then at the same time, we need to make sure that it's secure. It's achieving the outcomes and results for the business. And at the same time, it's not reducing our security posture. It's our security posture staying the same, or if not getting better.
Yep, for sure.
What I'm wondering, about mid-sized organization, practical approaches to the vendor and partner risk management. I think about like balancing innovation and the speed of innovation with security, right? What are your thoughts around that?
I feel like I'm a little bit in the minority on this, in that I'm not an early adopter. Like we when I started at Modus, everybody was talking. We were replatforming. So our original platform was on a lot of old PHP code, and we were replatforming. And people were saying, "Oh, should we use Erlang or should we use Go or anything?" And I said, "We're going to use Java because everybody uses Java." And it's used by banks, and they care a lot about security. And so we're going to continue to do things like that. The same is true of, tools like AI. We're very carefully, we're rolling out AI tools because everybody is, and the tools have gotten to a point now, I think, where they're actually quite useful. But we're being very judicious in our usage of that and making sure that we're tracking it and keeping tabs on it. So I like to wait until the Gartner hype cycle, we've passed through the trough of disillusionment and are up, on the upswing. Because I think there's a lot of risk in trying a lot of this stuff. It can provide cool results, but at what cost? And that's where you start to think, are these tools secure? What additional, risks do they entail? And so I think that's my philosophy. I'm a little bit in the minority in our organization when it comes to that, but I think we have a good balance of saying like, hold on a sec, this is still a little wild and rough around the edges. Like, should we hold on, or should we sandbox it and make sure that we're putting it in a place where the blast radius is minimized?
I love that. There are some really good takeaways, nuggets in there that, like, should we sandbox this? Like, I love your thoughts. I love your ideas about the creativity of this. And I think that we should look into it, but how do we minimize our risk? And yeah. I think that balance is important inside of organizations. I'm of the opinion, this is really cool. How do we start to look at, could we utilize this? But at the same time, like what you're saying is like finding that other end of the spectrum that says, hey, wait a minute, like let's not deploy this to prod, like like let's look at this, give this the sniff test, make sure that this is, and let's make sure it's stable, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can't be my true curmudgeonly self and say no to everything new. But I think doing things judiciously and reminding everyone involved that like there are, people's dollars at risk, including our own. If something bad happens when we roll this out, means we're gonna think through it. And I don't want to stop people's good ideas. We've had a lot of good ideas come out of some of this new technology, but let's be thoughtful about it.
And I think that even kind of lends itself to like giving some practical advice to like how companies prevent some of these future risks, right? It's like, don't run into a dark room quite yet before you know what's inside, right? Is the floor finished inside?
Right.
Is it safe?
Right. Exactly. Are there nails sticking up, from the bottom?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we've done things. We run tools in, internal environments. We set up separate Amazon, AWS accounts for things so that they can't go and you can spend limits. I mean, there's all sorts of threats. Like, you could have a runaway software process and come tomorrow, your AWS bill is several, orders of magnitude higher than you were expecting. So there's all sorts of things that can go awry when deploying some of this. And so thinking through what's your process and plan for how to mitigate, the threat, put it in an AWS account that doesn't have access to your prod data for a while. That kind of thing.
That's really good. Cause we get a questions about that a lot. And then I think you still need to apply the same security measures to that new little environment that you're testing with. Like, don't let it go off and do its own thing and then say, hey, well, we're just kind of testing this, so we're not going to like secure it. You should still secure it, because eventually you're going to, one day you're going to think, well, this is great, I want to move this into production. We need to apply the security that we do in production, even to our test, dev, staging,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we have a ton of AWS accounts, and we do all infrastructure as code. And so we can set things up, to our standard, but, doing it that way, helps just sort of contain things, while you're practicing. And AWS has been really open and good with us and partner with us in terms of saying like, here's the best practices for, structuring your AWS environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, AWS, I'm very grateful for them. They provide a lot of information. They actually do want to help you, consume their environment, but they also do want to help you, like, secure it. And I think they've been really good too in the realm of like, if you do have something rogue go off in your environment and, your invoice becomes, magnitudes of normal, they've not stuck you with that bill. I've read and seen and talked with other folks in the industry that, Amazon refunded them or took off the bill what wasn't theirs when they could prove it.
Yeah, they've been a fantastic partner. I have nothing but good things to say.
Yeah. If there's like 3 or, whatever the case may be, 2 or 3 or 4, cybersecurity priorities, for mid-market SaaS companies, what would some of them be in your mind, that you would be sharing with another colleague or a friend?
So I would say know what your risk is. So understand what data you have, where it lives, and who has access to it. So because you can't really understand where to apply your cybersecurity dollars and efforts until you understand what you have, where it lives, and who does what with it. Like we said earlier, we're not at the point where you can just secure everything. And so understanding what you have and how to handle that is crucial. And I think working on a risk-based process of securing, your tools, whether that means architecting your code, your system in a way that, sensitive information's in a different database. And then you put more, if you can't afford AWS firewall for all of your environments, then stick your super private information in a little nook and cranny and put a firewall around that, and make sure that you're doing that. So taking the best practices and applying them in a way that is, each organization is different in terms of their budgeting and priorities, but understanding what the risk is and where to apply the focus, I think, is critical. And I think the more, more and more you can start to take humans out of the equation. There's so much noise. There's so much chatter out there. And so starting to understand, how you can get a view of like, what are the real risks going on, and starting to understand, how do you filter the noise from the signal, is going to be really critical, because you're never going to have enough analysts or enough dollars to go look at every single thing that could be going wrong. So you need to be able to focus your attention on what is really important.
I like that analogy of like, if you can't afford, to secure something, this huge thing, right? Just have the conversation about, okay, let's move this off. What if we just focus in on the very important part, the thing that is most critical, right? We oftentimes have customers and people that we work with that are saying, well, we need to be SOC 2 Type 2. We need to be this certified. We go through this audit, and we have conversations with them. Well, is everything in scope, right? Or is there certain aspects of the environment that's in scope, and are there some aspects of the environment that are out of scope? Because they can be. And I even think that, I know this for a fact, that a lot of people just automatically assume 100% of everything is in scope. And when you actually have a true conversation with somebody that is a subject matter expert, that's not always the case for everything, right?
The last thing I was going to say was, don't let your production and data go out of your production environment. So every company, they're like, oh, we're just going to take a copy of production and stick it in our dev environment, and we'll test with that.
Oh boy.
If you can get away from that at the beginning and not set that up, and basically say our production environment is the only place where production data lives, and we're going to scrub it, we're going to do synthetic data, et cetera. A lot of companies take a lot of time to undo that and to re-stick everything back into the prod environment. So if you could not do that, then they can do exactly what you're saying, which is, really your prod environment is where if you can certify that like no data leaves your prod environment, then really what you are concerned about is securing that prod environment.
And that's exactly sanitizing the data, synthetic data, making sure that data, like for instance, one of the things that we do is that no contractors, get access to prod, right? That's not always applicable, to every organization, but it sort of makes sure that your employees that are United States based only have access to prod environment, right? And the other people that you may use to do certain things, well, they get access to dev, test, staging, what have you, but they have a completely different set of data. They may actually never know who your customers are, right? Or your customer data.
I totally agree. And all of these things take time, and when you're in a hurry building up your company and you just need somebody to come in and slam code, it takes time, but I think it's almost always easier to do it from the beginning than to go back and do it. And then, when you have to go back and do it 5 years from now, then you're competing with, well, but I just need this one other feature. I just need this other feature. And so the time to do it, it's like when you ship something goes into production, it's in production forever. So you just got to be careful with what you put into production.
What are some practical steps? I know we've been kind of naming a few here, but, just for the audience of listeners, thinking about like strengthening vendor risk management or API security. I think that's like so many organizations today rely on API, and how do we double click on that? How do we like press into that so that we can actually make sure that the data that we're sharing, the connections that we're sharing, are truly secure?
Yeah. So, we spend a fair amount of time with our vendors understanding their security policy, how they do SDLCs, how they treat our data, making sure that they're certified to our same level, and understanding what data we're sending them, and making sure that that's sort of, firewalled off so that we're not accidentally sending them additional data. So, really understanding and partnering, finding a vendor that you can partner with, has been a really good strategy for us, in that we've, almost always been able to say, like, hey, this security policy doesn't, this doesn't quite make sense. Can you adjust this? Can we work on a different authentication mechanism? Like, can you store, a refresh token and get an access token every, time you call us? And things like that. So limited credentials, making sure that their credentials to us are scoped in such a way that they can only access the data that they need, vice versa. Understanding the data lifecycle. When we delete a piece of data, do they delete it? How often do they delete it? Is it, what's their policy? So sort of not just treating them as a set of API endpoints, but really understanding like them as a partner and an organization that's going to be holding your data. How do you manage that? So that's
how long they hold the data.
Exactly. And so finding
sure they're cutting in at one spot, that type of thing, right?
Yeah. So finding partners who are willing to work with you and understand that level of importance, I think, is really critical. And then, API security, good logging is always your friend. Rotation of credentials is your friend. Customers don't always like that, but, making sure that we're doing the best that we can. And once you say, like, hey, look, this is a security matter, they understand it. And so making sure you include APIs in your, red team penetration testing, things like that, anomaly, detection on your logs and, your WAF and things like that. So, it's an increased surface area that you have to continue to maintain and secure. But, the partner discussion, I think treating that, can be, you got to be very careful when you vet your partners. And we've bailed on a couple of partners, when it seemed like they were not doing the right level of due diligence and work on their side. So being willing to say, like, this functionally may work fine, but they're not a good partner from a security perspective. You have to be willing to pull the cord on that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that this is an area, you said one of my favorite words, logs. Logs is extremely important. Tells you, the footprints in the sand, around what happened, right? And what's going on. And we're still convincing companies these days to log activities in certain ways and certain methods and in certain areas because of the proof. You need the proof. At the end of the day, did this action take place? What time did it take place? What steps and what order did it take place? And but I completely agree in the other sense that you were mentioning, which was, is the partner taking security as serious as you do? Are they being honest with their roadmap? Does their roadmap align with yours? Do they see, like, wow, this is really a security gap, and although we already have our roadmap aligned or outlined, for the next 3 or 6 months, are we willing to change it up to put this thing that our partner is asking us to put in? That, I think, is a true partnership, is where companies see the things that are happening and realize, like, okay, well, we need to pull something that was 9 months from now up. And we need to try and figure out how do we get this in the next 1 to 2 months, So those are some things that we've seen and we've asked partners to do as well. I appreciate your time, Scott. As always, love the conversation that we had today. And is it okay if people maybe reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yeah. I'm not super active on LinkedIn, but I do keep an eye on my messages. And so, yeah, I'm always happy to have conversations and really enjoyed our conversation today and got some good, I think that we're good. We talked about some good ideas.
Well, thank you everyone for watching and participating in today's Miller Mindset episode. We will have more fun and exciting. We've got some more great guests lined up in the future. So without further ado, thank you, Scott, for joining today. Have an awesome rest of your day, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Jason.